Okay. Welcome back, everyone, to the Cup of Joe. You'll have to pardon that name. It's a series on Facebook of live stream conversations on topics that are among the most important to the constituents of the Hampshire, Franklin, Worcester district. We launched this series earlier this month, thanks to the very fabulous work of Caitlin Billings, who directs communications and engagement for our team. And we're trying in this pretty volatile time to open up new ways for our team to get timely information to the people we work for. And I can't think, and I bet you our guest can't think of a few topics more pressing than talking about public education for our communities. And in the legislature, if you want to talk public education, you talk to Senator Jason Lewis, who has very generously offered to join this series. Our conversation is going to last until just before around 1:30, when I'll close and I'll talk about next steps, unless Senator Lewis and I get a roll call vote as session starts, because we have a bill before us today in the session. But that's something that we have to factor in. So Senator Lewis has been the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Education for the previous 3 sessions and was just named chair again for the 2025-26 legislative session. And boy, am I lucky to have him as a colleague, and are we all lucky to have him as Senate Chair of this really important committee. Senator Lewis represents the people of the 5th Middlesex District of Massachusetts, which includes the cities and towns of Malden, Melrose, Reading, Stoneham, Wakefield, and parts of Winchester. He was first elected to the Senate in 2014. He has led education reform, efforts to raise the state's minimum wage to $15 an hour. We have Jason to thank, and worked to create a new universal paid family and medical leave program, also thanks to Senator Lewis's leadership. So welcome, Senator Lewis.
Thank you so much, Senator Comerford. I'm so delighted to be a guest on Cup of Joe. I love the name of your show.
You know, when you have a name like Joe, Jason, we have to lean in. So Senator Lewis, I'm absolutely delighted that you've been appointed, as I said, Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Education. Could you just give us an overview of how that committee, just to crack open this conversation, how that committee will gear up for this session, and what you're thinking as the session really gets off properly now that committees have been established?
Well, as you know all too well, Senator Comerford, and your constituents do as well. There's nothing more important to our constituents, to our families, to our communities than the quality of our public schools. It's one of the most important factors that we use to decide, where we live, where we raise our children. And to me, that's why I ran for the state legislature in the first place, was to try to do everything I could to make sure that we have excellent public schools for children in all communities across Massachusetts, regardless of the socioeconomics, regardless of the geography of the communities or any other factor. So it's really important, as you and I work very collaboratively in your role as the chair of higher education, because there's a lot of overlap there. We also do a lot of work on the early education side to kind of make sure young children are prepared when they enter kindergarten. We've got a lot to be proud of in terms of the state of our public schools in Massachusetts, but there's also a lot of work to do. We have a lot of communities struggling with fiscal challenges. I'm sure we'll talk more about that. We have a lot of students with needs, whether they're special education, mental health needs. We still having a lot of work to do to recover from the pandemic. And so we've got a full agenda ahead of us this legislative session in Education Committee, and going to be working closely with you and our colleagues.
No, that's really important. And I'm really glad, Senator Lewis, that you laid out the breadth of the Education Committee for folks who are listening, right? So it's pre-K all the way up to 12. And as Senator Lewis said, in the Senate, we do think about that leap to public higher education. And just as we were getting ready to leave a meeting we were in before this, Senator Lewis and I acknowledged that we really do have to actually take on some pieces of work together, whether it's early college or FAFSA completion, right? What is that space between 12th grade and a potential leap to higher education, and how can we be part of that? And the Senate's done some really good work there, but how can we be part of that strengthening agent? And in your list of accomplishments, I can't believe I didn't list your work to really substantially lean in, both in policy and in funding, to early education and care. And I know providers out in Western Massachusetts see you and see your leadership and are super grateful for that. So you started to allude to this. You and I have spoken at great length about the particular hardships faced by school districts in Western Massachusetts. We've talked a lot about the Student Opportunity Act, which I was proud to vote for, and was largely a racial, social justice, economic justice bill. And it was really important because before Student Opportunity Act, the quality of a child or a family public education experience would have been largely zip code based, right? And so with your leadership, we said no to that. And now we're in a new piece of work, which will have to include districts like ours in Western Massachusetts, which are low and declining enrollment. We call them minimum aid districts, lots of different names for folks who are watching. I know we correspond on them, and also rural schools. And you're a tremendous ally in this conversation. And so can we talk, or can you help us understand the folks who are listening, what you believe we have to do as a state to address our particular realities in Western Massachusetts?
Sure. Well, let me start by saying to everybody who's listening, there is no fiercer advocate for the needs of schools in her district, and in fact, all of Western Massachusetts, than Senator Jo Comerford. You are so lucky to have her representing you. And I'm as Senator Comerford said, I represent a district that's just outside of the city of Boston. So it's basically Boston suburbs. We have our own challenges, but I am not having the lived experience of what is going on, in more rural, smaller Western Mass communities. So I really lean on, Senator Comerford and some of my other colleagues in Central and Western Massachusetts to really understand these challenges. I have had the good fortune to visit on a number of occasions and obviously talk directly with superintendents and school committee members and mayors and so forth. But it is very clear to me, and certainly has been for a long time, that there are unique challenges, that are faced by our rural communities, our Western Massachusetts communities. They tend to be smaller. They tend to have, less fiscal capacity than some of our larger communities in the greater Boston area. Some are struggling with, flat to declining student enrollment, which creates other challenges. So you've got a combination of fiscal challenges and also a challenge of being able to provide, all of the opportunities that we want our students to have, right? In terms of all the classes, the AP classes, the mental health services, the extracurriculars, because every kid should be able to have access to that regardless of where they live. So we've taken some steps over the last few years. We had a really great Blue Ribbon Commission that made a series of important recommendations for how to better serve rural schools. Senator Comerford has been leading that implementation of that. We have added a rural school aid to the state budget, and we've been increasing that amount of money, although it needs to be increased more. We've been trying to do more around transportation and special education. So I'm going to certainly continue to make that a priority, working with you and our colleagues this session to do even more to support the needs of the districts, school districts and communities you represent, because I know they really are facing, tough challenges.
Boy, they're tough. And I know you know that. And, for folks who are listening, for me, as the person who works for you, to have a colleague like Senator Lewis who understands this, I just actually can't get it out enough words on February 26th, the Wednesday, February 26th at 1:15 to help you understand what that means for us in Western Massachusetts, because not everyone will come with the awareness that Senator Lewis has in the position he's in. And I just want to pull back for a second and take the folks who were listening back to the fiscal year 26 budget, Senator Lewis, when you led an amendment that I was proud to support that said, you know what? Yes, we have to do all this work, right? We have to get the rural school aid number up. We have to look at special education, which is highly in need of reform, and we have to actually fund some of the programs like Circuit Breaker. We have to fund regional school transportation, right? All of these that have been over time neglected. We have to fully fund charter school mitigation, although we should have a little conversation about that. These are both policy issues, but they're also budget issues. But in the budget debate of in the current budget that we're in right now, fiscal year 25, Senator Lewis said, you know what, we have to do more. Again, and I was proud to be with him. We have to look again, both at Chapter 70, but also at something called the municipal contribution formula. So in our communities, folks, maybe you're going to laugh at this because I'm always at meetings, Jason, saying things like we have to look at what school districts get and what they give. And together, that's the money that districts grapple with, what they're asked to contribute and what they get from the state. And now our way, it's really out of whack for a number of different reasons, including declining population, but also including how we measure wealth and the percentage of aid that the city or town pays versus the state. So could you help us understand just, what was in your mind when you were thinking that? And then, of course, the Senate president said, yeah, we have to do that in her opening day speech this session. So where do you think we are with that conversation?
Sure. Well, first of all, this is sort of a black box, to most people. And you're one of the few, colleagues I have in the legislature who has really taken the time to dig into our school funding formula and really understand, how it's supposed to work, how it works in practice, what we need to do to reform it. But like all states, we do have a formula that is used to determine, how much state aid is given annually to each school district in Massachusetts. That's known as Chapter 70. It's the second biggest part of the state budget after our Medicaid program. It's hugely important. That formula, periodically over time, we've reviewed it and reviewed aspects of it and made updates. The last major time was the Student Opportunity Act in 2019. We made some very important updates, and you were part of that process and supported it. And that's made a big difference for especially gateway cities, including Springfield and Pittsfield and in Western Mass. But it's not enough. And, things keep changing and evolving. And so I believe, and as I know you do, and you and I have teamed up on this to make the case that we need to revisit that school funding formula, the so-called Chapter 70 formula again. It's been, almost 10 years now since we did it. So 10 years is a long time, right? And we need to look at, is that formula adequately funding all of our schools? And is it doing so in an equitable way? Because we want to make sure that, every community can afford, with a combination of its local resources and the state aid it receives, to provide that high quality education that, is so important to us and to our constituents. So it was wonderful, as you said, at the beginning of the legislative session back in January, the Senate president, Senator Spilka, was giving her opening day speech, setting out her priorities. And to our great delight, right, you and I looked at each other as soon as she said that one of her priorities is to undertake another review of school funding and to make sure it is adequate and equitable. So I'm very optimistic we're going to get that process really underway, this year.
Yeah, I am too. And actually, I haven't showed this to you yet, Senator Lewis, but Western Mass constituents sent thank you cards to Senator Spilka and our minority leader, Bruce Tarr, right? Because both of them acknowledged that 10 years is too long and we need to update it. And then also this municipal contribution, right? What communities are asked to give has been 17 years since we've done that one. And wow, that's really old. And I'll just say for folks, there are a few people who understand the municipal contribution side, like Senator Lewis. The Chapter 70 side is also complicated, but the municipal contribution side is really a whopper because there's all kinds of assumptions. And some constituents, maybe, I think you may remember their names, Jason, from Mike Naughton and Tupper Brown up in Gill, have been, I always joke with them that I think they are among the very few who understand some of the assumptions and underlying algorithms that drive what communities are purported to have to pay in order to meet foundation budget requirements. And that's out of whack for us in Western Mass, for sure. So I think doing both of those together, if we can, could be actually, not to be hyperbolic here, but could be a lifesaver for us in Western.
And we may need to enlist the help of Mike and Tupper as we move forward, because I'm hopeful we are going to have a public process and a commission with experts. And so we'll be looking for people who really have dug into this to help us figure out solutions, because that's what we need, are workable solutions.
Absolutely, 100%. And they have a lot of ideas. And they've tested a lot of theories, as you know, because they're big fans as well of you. And then just for folks who are listening, there's, in addition to what Senator Lewis said earlier about the kind of funding we need, in addition to the bill that he's proposed to do just what he's talking about, to crack open these formulas, again, there is a bill, and I will here shout out to Natalie Blais, Rep. Natalie Blais, who's an unbelievable partner and leader in this. She was part of the original commission. I inherited this work from our good friend, Senator Adam Hines, who we miss. And of course, I cared about it, but I didn't chair that initial commission. And Adam did for the Senate. He did a beautiful job with Natalie. And so there is a bill, a rural schools bill that, you know, we actually should rename, Senator Lewis, because it wouldn't only help rural schools. It would help regional schools. It would help in a lot of ways, schools with declining enrollment, because it does suggest that we take on issues like special education funding and how we do it as a state. So that will come before your committee. In the last couple of minutes that we have, could you share how you believe people can be most effective?
Absolutely. So absolutely, I'm looking forward to that, working on that bill with you and Rep. Blais and others this session. This will be the second session that bill was filed, and we made some progress moving it along last session, but we need to keep that momentum up. So what I would say to folks is, you know, we have over 300 bills in the Education Committee this session. They're being assigned to the committee now by the Senate and the House Clerk. We'll then organize the bills by subject matter area, by topic area, and we'll have public hearings. So anyone who's interested in particular areas, obviously the bill that Senator Comerford just mentioned, that'll be publicly available when the hearing is held, and anybody can participate either in person or, probably more likely, given where you all live, remotely, because we do have remote access for all our public hearings for all our committees. And you can also submit in writing to Senator Comerford your views, and then she certainly will pass that on to my office. And, you know, we want folks to, you know, from Western Mass and all across the Commonwealth to stay involved, you know, in this process as we work on these very important issues this session.
Thank you. Yeah. And I always say to folks, legislators, it's like it's the worst kept secret, or maybe the best kept secret. I don't even know what I'm trying to say. Tell us a fact and give us a story about your experience with public school. And that is undeniably the best way you can be an advocate. Open up our hearts and minds at the same time. And while that bill's churning, as Senator Lewis said, we're going to be looking at the fiscal year 26 budget. So Ways and Means hearings will kick off now, and that's important. So we'll be really asking a lot of questions of the administration about their assumptions and what they want to do. Both Senator Lewis and I have talked to the governor and Secretary Tutwiler about what we hope the administration will do in terms of leading. And we'll be looking at other pots of money like fair share. And what we're going to do with the proposal for the additional fair share money and beyond. Thanks, Senator Lewis, for being part of this. Really grateful to you for taking the time.
My great pleasure. And thank you for having me. Thank you for the great work you do on behalf of your district and constituents, and really looking forward to working together on both K-12 and higher ed this legislative session.
Be terrific. It'll be good to be with you. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Be well.